the white guest. Bangkok at night is a different world. The streets never really sleep, and even when the clubs start closing and the bars slow down, the sidewalks are still alive. You'll see little plastic tables set up under buzzing lights, the smell of grilling meat and fried garlic filling the air. Locals and tourists sit shoulder to shoulder, sweating from the heat but still laughing, drinking, and eating late into the night. These stalls are cheap, casual, and sometimes the best meals you'll ever have. Now, among all those stalls in the entertainment district, there's one with a story people whisper about. It looks like any other spot. Red stools, bright lights, a couple of big pots simmering, the clatter of woks and spatulas. But the regulars will point to one chair in particular, a seat that's always empty, no matter how crowded it gets. People will nudge each other and say, "That's her seat." And by her, they mean the woman in white. Some customers swear they can see her sitting there. Not everyone, just certain people. She's always described the same way. A young woman, long black hair, wearing plain white clothes. To anyone else, the chair looks empty, just waiting for someone to sit down. Even the stall owner insists he's never seen anything there. But the customers who do see her, the ones unlucky enough to notice, are the ones who don't make it home. Here's what they say happens. Imagine you're leaving the stall after a long night. Maybe you've got a bag of fried rice, or grilled pork skewers, or noodles in one of those plastic bags they tie at the top. If you've ever been to Bangkok, you know the type. You're walking through the neon glow, weaving through the crowd, and then you turn down a quieter street on your way home. That's when you hear it. A voice. A woman's voice. Calm and almost playful. Right behind you. What's in the bag? And if you turn around, if you make the mistake of reacting, you're gone. Just like that. Nobody sees you again. The only thing left is the bag itself. By morning, it'll be found somewhere along the street, the plastic still tied shut. Maybe sitting in the gutter or dropped in the middle of the sidewalk. And whatever was inside, fried rice, noodles, chicken wings, it's always gone. Completely empty. People in the neighborhood whisper about it. They say, if she looks at your bag, it won't stay yours. Some think she's just hungry. Some think she died at that stall years ago. Maybe from food poisoning or maybe something worse. Nobody agrees on the details, but everyone agrees on one thing. You don't sit in her chair, and you don't answer the voice. The stall owner? He just laughs it off. Says it's drunks making up stories, but funny enough, he never sets utensils on that chair. Every other place has chopsticks and a spoon, but that one stays bare. And if a tourist tries to sit there, the regulars will quietly move the chair away, or tell them it's broken. They never explain why. They just don't want to be the one responsible when something happens. For people outside Thailand, the whole woman in white thing might need a little context. In Southeast Asian ghost stories, white clothes usually mean death, not a wedding dress like in Western ghost tales. It's more like the cloth people are wrapped in for funerals. So if someone tells you about a woman in plain white, long hair, pale skin, it usually means restless spirit, the kind that doesn't let go. And the plastic bag detail? That's important too. In Bangkok, almost all street food gets packed in those thin bags. Soups, curries, fried rice, even iced coffee. You carry it home swinging from your hand, dripping with condensation. So everyone has the same image burned into their minds. A person carrying a bag of food, alone on a dark street. Easy for a ghost to pick out. I heard one story from a friend's uncle. He was eating at that stall late one night, drinking beer, when he noticed a younger guy staring hard at the empty chair. The kid looked spooked, like he was trying not to draw attention. The uncle didn't think much of it until later, when he saw the same guy leaving with a bag of fried chicken. Next morning, the bag was sitting right at the entrance of the alley. The chicken inside? Gone. Nobody saw the guy again. That's the thing about stories like this in Thailand. They're not told like urban legends you laugh off. They're told as warnings, as things you respect. People leave offerings at spirit houses every day. They talk about unlucky corners or haunted alleys like it's part of the landscape. You don't have to believe it, but you also don't test it. So maybe the stall owner is right. Maybe it's just a story people made up after too many drinks. Or maybe he's just smart enough to keep his mouth shut. All I know is this. If you're ever in Bangkok, eating at a late night stall under the fluorescent lights, and you notice one chair nobody touches, don't sit there. Don't even joke about it. And if you're walking home later with your bag swinging at your side, and you hear a woman's voice behind you asking, "What's in the bag?" keep walking. Don't turn around. The Shadow Monk. Thailand has these old temples called Wat. If you've ever been, you know they aren't just tourist spots. They're active, breathing places where monks live, people bring offerings, and the buildings themselves seem to hold on to the air of centuries. In the daytime, a Wat feels peaceful, full of incense smoke and golden statues glinting in the light. But at night, after the gates close and the candles burn low, it's a very different place. There's this story people tell about a man who worked as a night guard at a small old temple out in the countryside. His job was simple. After the gates were shut, he walked the grounds, made sure no one had slipped in, and kept an eye on the main hall. One night during his rounds, he stepped into the main hall. This is the heart of the temple, where the Buddha image sits up front on the altar. The place was quiet, lit only by a few oil lamps, and the moonlight spilling through the high windows. And that's when he noticed something strange. There was a monk seated on the floor in front of the statue. The man only saw the monk's back, draped in the familiar saffron robes. At first, he didn't think anything was wrong. Monks sometimes meditate late or chant to themselves. But then he realized the temple was supposed to be empty. The monks had retired to their quarters hours ago. Still, there it was. The figure of a monk, perfectly still. And then came the sound. A voice, low and rhythmic, chanting. It wasn't in Thai. It wasn't in Pali either. That's the old language usually used in Buddhist prayers. It was something else. Some guttural string of sounds that made no sense, like syllables twisted in the wrong order. The guard felt his skin crawl. He stood there for a moment, torn between leaving quietly and trying to prove he wasn't just imagining things. Finally, he worked up the nerve and called out softly, "Luang Pi." That's what you say to address a monk, kind of like venerable brother. The chanting stopped. The figure shifted slightly, and then, slowly, it began to turn around. The guard braced himself, expecting to see a monk's face, maybe stern, maybe tired. But instead, there was nothing. No nose, no mouth, no eyes. Just a black hollow where a face should have been, like staring into an empty cave. The man froze. His body screamed at him to run, but he couldn't even scream. The figure leaned closer, as if peering at him through that impossible hole. And in that moment, something was taken from him. When the guard stumbled out of the hall and into the night, he tried to call for help. Nothing came out. Not even a whisper. He could breathe, he could cough, but his voice was gone. Doctors checked him later. His throat wasn't swollen, his vocal cords weren't damaged. There was no medical reason. But from that night on, he never spoke another word. The temple didn't call it an illness. They had their own explanation. People there whispered that the shadow monk walks the hall at night, and anyone who dares to call out to him loses their voice forever. The night monk steals your voice, they said. And after that incident, the guards changed. Nobody wanted to take the night shift in the main hall anymore. If they had to go near, they kept their eyes down, walked fast, and never spoke. For those unfamiliar with Thai culture, monks are deeply respected figures. They're seen as guides, teachers, people who live with discipline. So the idea of a monk's shadow, something wearing the robes but not really human, is unsettling on a whole different level. It twists the comfort of something familiar into a warning. Not everything dressed in saffron is what it seems. Even stranger, temples are usually thought of as safe. They're where people go for blessings, for protection, to make merit. But stories like this turn that comfort inside out, suggesting that even the holiest places hold shadows you don't want to meet. The locals still talk about that guard sometimes. Some say he sees the shadow monk every night in his dreams, chanting in that same unrecognizable language. Others say he can still be found sitting near the temple, pointing and gesturing to warn people away from the hall after dark. He can't speak, but his eyes tell the story well enough. And if you ever find yourself wandering a temple at night, long after the gates have closed, and you hear a low chant in words you can't quite make out, don't call out. Don't try to get a better look, because if the monk turns to face you, you might never speak again. The water bucket. If you've ever been in Thailand during April, you've probably heard of Songkran. That's the Thai New Year, and it's famous for being the biggest water fight in the world. For a few days, everyone, kids, grandparents, office workers, even tourists, take to the streets with water guns, buckets, and hoses. You can't walk down a block without getting soaked. It's hot season, so the splashing feels good, and there's music, laughter, and whole neighborhoods turning into water battle zones. But not every story about Songkran is fun. There's one that people whisper late at night, after the music fades and the streets quiet down. They say the living aren't the only ones who come out looking for water. The story goes like this. 1 year after the official celebrations had ended, a young man was walking home through a narrow alley. The main streets were still wet, glittering under the yellow glow of the streetlights, and plastic buckets lay forgotten by the roadside. His clothes clung to his skin, still damp from the festival. He was tired, happy, and ready for bed. Then, out of nowhere, splash! A bucket of freezing cold water dumped straight over his head. It wasn't playful, not the way strangers usually laugh and splash during Songkran. This water stank. It smelled like something rotten, heavy with mold and damp earth. He spun around, furious, ready to yell. And that's when he saw them. A group of children stood in the alley, each clutching a dented old water bucket. At first glance, they looked like any neighborhood kids, but when he caught the streetlight on their faces, his stomach dropped. Their skin was raw and blistered, peeling in patches like they had been burned or scalded. Water oozed from their arms, their faces, dripping down in steady rivulets. Their eyes were clouded over, gray and lifeless, and they were smiling. Not cheerful, mischievous smiles, but wide, empty grins that never touched their eyes. The young man stumbled backward. He wanted to run, but his legs felt heavy. Then one of the children lifted a bucket and swung it forward. The splash hit his back, soaking through his shirt. The water burned cold against his skin. He bolted. He ran through the alley, slipping on the wet concrete, lungs burning. Behind him, he heard giggles echoing off the walls. High-pitched, wrong somehow, like the voices were bubbling up through water. When he finally made it home, he stripped off his shirt, shivering. The skin on his back looked pale, like he had spent too long in the sun. He thought maybe it was just irritation. Maybe he was imagining it. But as the hours passed, his reflection in the mirror changed. His skin began to swell, puffing up like dough left too long to rise. By dawn, it had turned ghostly white. And then it started peeling. Not in flakes, not like a sunburn, but in thick sheets rolling off his body until there was almost nothing left underneath. His roommate swore he heard muffled screams coming from the bathroom, but when he forced the door open, there was no one inside. Just a pile of wet clothes on the tiles and a faint puddle of water, already seeping away. The locals have a saying: on the nights of Songkran, the dead return for water. They believe those children were victims from years past. Kids who drowned during the festival, or who never made it out of swollen rivers when the water games got out of hand. Instead of resting, they wander back, carrying their buckets, looking for someone to share in their thirst. And anyone unlucky enough to be splashed by their cloudy water doesn't last till morning. If you ask around, you'll hear more than one version. Some say the buckets are filled with river water, thick and green, the kind no one should drink. Others say the kids' bodies drip because they're still carrying the water from the moment they died. A few even claim the children knock on doors in the middle of the night, asking for water in small voices. If you answer, you'll see their pale faces pressed against your gate, smiling as they raise their buckets. Most people laugh it off, just another ghost story to scare tourists. But not everyone's laughing. Some families make sure to leave water outside their homes during Songkran nights. Little bowls or bottles, like offerings. They say it keeps the children from knocking, keeps the buckets from tipping over your head. And when the last night of Songkran ends and the city dries out again, everyone breathes easier. So next time you're in Thailand for the new year and you've spent the day soaking wet, remember this: when the music stops and the laughter fades, don't wander alone through the alleys. And if you hear the splash of a bucket behind you, followed by the sound of giggles, don't look back. Because it might not be just the living still playing in the streets. The last passenger. If you've ever been to Thailand, you've probably taken a tuk-tuk at least once. They're those three-wheeled taxis that buzz through traffic like oversized go-karts, engines rattling, neon lights sometimes flickering along the sides. Tourists ride them for fun, but for the drivers, it's a hard job. Long hours, little money, endless noise. Most keep going late into the night, hoping for that one last fare before heading home. But among tuk-tuk drivers, there's a story that makes some of them refuse to work past midnight. They talk about the last passenger. It usually begins the same way. A driver is tired, maybe parked at the edge of a quiet road, when he hears someone call out. He turns around and sees a passenger already sitting in the back seat. That's the strange part. He never saw the person get in. The passenger sits with their head lowered, never showing their face, and in a low, almost monotone voice, they say one thing: "To Wat." For anyone who doesn't know, Wat means temple. They're everywhere in Thailand, grand golden ones in the city, small worn ones in villages. And while temples are usually safe, holy places, at night they can feel hauntingly empty. So the driver starts the engine and takes off. The streets are nearly deserted, just patches of light under the street lamps, dogs crossing here and there, and the echo of the engine bouncing off closed shop fronts. Sometimes the driver tries to talk, maybe to ask which entrance to use, but the passenger doesn't respond. They just sit there, silent, head still bowed. By the time the tuk-tuk rolls up in front of the temple gates, the driver glances back. The seat is empty. The passenger is gone. But on the worn leather seat, there's always the same thing: a small pile of coins, cold to the touch. More than enough for the fare. That's when the story turns darker. A few days later, other drivers or locals will find that same driver inside the temple grounds. He'll be hanging from a tree or from the rafters of an old pavilion. Always the same temple where he dropped off the passenger. No note, no explanation, no sign of struggle. just the coins. Among tuk-tuk drivers, the warning is clear. If you take the last passenger, you won't be around long. They whisper that the final customer isn't really a person at all, but a guide, an escort for the road to the afterlife. Some say the coins aren't ordinary money. They're offerings, the kind left at shrines or given to the dead, and by accepting them, the driver is sealing his own fate. Others believe the passenger is a spirit of someone who died on the road, doomed to ride forever until someone else takes their place. There's a detail I always found eerie. Drivers who survive long enough to tell the tale describe the voice. Not angry, not frightening, just low, calm, and final. Like someone who already knows the end of your story. And the temples aren't random. It's always the same few old Wats, ones with shadowed courtyards and towering trees, the kind of places locals already avoid at night. For people unfamiliar with Thai culture, it's worth knowing that temples aren't just religious spots. They're woven into daily life. Weddings, funerals, festivals, blessings. They all happen there. So the idea of a temple being the final stop, the place where a driver's life ends, makes the story hit harder. It's not some abandoned ruin. It's a place everyone knows. These days, fewer drivers work the late shift. They'll laugh when tourists ask for a ride past midnight. But if you push, you'll see the hesitation. Some will flat out refuse. And if you happen to be walking home late and you hear the rattle of a tuk-tuk pulling up beside you, don't joke about being the last passenger. For the drivers, it's not funny. It's a reminder. Because once you've taken that ride to the temple, there's no coming back. Cemetery fireworks. Thailand has a long rainy season, when the sky cracks open almost every evening, and the fields flood until frogs and crickets drown out everything else. In the countryside, the nights can feel endless, dark, heavy, and alive with sounds you don't hear in the city. Out in those rural areas, there are small cemeteries by the edge of rice fields, or tucked behind temples. Not fancy marble like in the West, but rows of weathered stones, some leaning, some half swallowed by weeds. And every once in a while, during the rainy nights, people say you can see fireworks rise from those cemeteries. Not big festival fireworks, nothing colorful or loud, just little sparks shooting up, like someone lit a handful of firecrackers, or a weak Roman candle. They streak into the sky, pop faintly, and disappear. The locals call them the dead man's fireworks. Young people, of course, can't resist. They see sparks from a distance and sneak out with flashlights, daring each other to check it out. The grown-ups warn them not to. They say those lights aren't meant for the living. One story goes like this. A group of boys followed the glow into the graveyard one wet night. The air smelled of damp earth and wet grass, their flip-flops sucking at the mud with every step. They were laughing, nudging each other, but the laughter faded when they got closer. Between the headstones, they saw movement. White hands, pale as bone, were reaching up from the soil itself. The hands weren't clawing to escape. They were holding thin sticks, lighting small charges. Each time the sparks hissed, the hands shook as if laughing, and faint giggles mixed with the crackle. The fireworks flared just enough to light up the faces leaning out of the ground. Skin washed out and waterlogged, eyes cloudy, mouths slack. The boys froze. They knew they should run, but one of them leaned forward, trying to get a better look. That's when one of the pale hands dropped the firework and shot upward, wrapping tight around his ankle. He screamed, but before the others could grab him, the earth seemed to soften under his feet, sucking him down. The mud splashed, then stilled. By the time the rest of them turned and ran, the only sound behind them was the fizz of another tiny firework. The boy was never seen again. The villagers tell their children the same warning. Don't watch the dead celebrate. They believe that once you spy on that festival, you're no longer counted among the living. The dead don't like being stared at, and they'll take you down so you can join in their fun. Some elders claim the fireworks are offerings that were never burned during the ghost festival, so the spirits light them themselves. Others whisper that the fireworks are bait, meant to lure the curious close enough for a hand to reach them. Either way, no one argues with the rule. When sparks rise over the cemetery, you stay inside. For people outside Thailand, it might sound strange. Fireworks in a graveyard. But here, fireworks aren't only for parties. They're used in religious ceremonies, funerals, even as offerings to spirits. So the idea of the dead lighting their own isn't so far from the way people already think about spirits in daily life. And remember, in the countryside, cemeteries aren't fenced off with locked gates. They're part of the landscape, just down the path from your house. Kids pass them on the way to school. Farmers cut through them to get to the fields. That closeness makes the story sharper, less like legend and more like a practical warning. There are still people who swear they've seen the fireworks with their own eyes, small bursts of light rising silently into the wet night, when no one in the village was celebrating. And every time it happens, the dogs bark and howl until the sparks fade. So if you ever find yourself in a rural Thai village during the rainy season, and you see faint sparks rising above the cemetery walls, don't wander out to take a closer look. Don't laugh it off as kids playing with leftover firecrackers. Because if the dead are having their festival, you don't want to be their next guest.